All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you. I am Betty Francisco. I am the CEO of Boston Impact Initiative Fund, and I want to welcome all of you to our very first Women's History Month event that we are co-hosting with our friends at the Lazu Group. So we're really excited to have you here today. This is part of what we're calling our new Majority Future Speaker Series. So this is the very first one, kicking it off on Women's History Month. And you'll be seeing more of these, hopefully throughout the year on a quarterly basis. So I want to welcome all of you. Tell you a little bit about BII first. I think all of you are very familiar with some of our work and some of you are new to us. So Boston Impact Initiative Fund is a place-based impact investment fund that invests what we call integrated capital, that's equity, debt, and grants in regenerative local enterprises in Eastern Massachusetts that are owned and controlled by entrepreneurs of color or that are serving communities of color. And our broader mission is to use capital as a tool to close the racial wealth divide in Eastern Mass. Since 2017, BII Fund has invested $7.4 million in integrated capital investments across 63 companies. And our portfolio is majority governed, run, and staffed by people of color. And close to 70% of the founders of our investments are people of color, and 50% are women-owned businesses. So really excited to kick off Women's History Month with 4 of our portfolio companies. You will meet them very soon and you'll meet their founders. So excited to have you, Malia, Jess, JC, and Michele, because we've worked with you over the years. And what we're really happy about is that all of you, one is you're working together. So within our portfolio, you are collaborating, you're leaders in our community, but you're working on really interesting things to move the needle in what I call high growth industries of the future, clean energy, construction, healthcare, and you're doing it in a way that's driving equity and inclusion for our communities and for people of color. So we're really excited to kick off the conversation today about what you're working on, about how you're using your leadership, your trailblazing, your innovation to start to drive forward more inclusion. And I'm excited to hear more about what you're doing in your particular industries. So I want to invite you to welcome our MC, Malia Lazu. Malia is co-hosting with us. And Malia, I've known for a very long time. She wears many hats and has been involved in many, many things. And she is an award-winning, tenured strategist in diversity and inclusion and has sparked deep economic development and investment in urban entrepreneurship for over 20 years. In her previous role as EVP and regional president at Berkshire Bank, Malia worked to generate wealth for communities by expanding access to capital, spurring economic growth, especially in communities of color that have traditionally been left behind. She is one of the architects, in the context I know her deeply in, of the PPP Equitable Access Initiative that in 2020 helped over 2,000 companies get access to PPP loans. I know her in the context of advising several corporations around their DEI strategy. And now, most importantly, she is part of the BII family as a portfolio company. So Malia, welcome. So excited to have you and to have you lead this conversation this afternoon. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Betty, and welcome everyone to this conversation. It's wonderful to be officially part of the BII family, although I feel like I've been a cousin that liked to pop by on 4th of July's whenever possible. Michael Freeze, it's great to see you, and Deborah, our crazy founders who were crazy enough to invest and see the benefits and the economic development of doing something like Boston Impact Initiative. And both of them were huge supporters of Accelerate Boston, an organization that helped fund so many great Boston groups. So it's great to see you both here as well. I want to jump into this conversation. We're at the tail end of Women's History Month, but we have a great, energetic conversation for you here today. So let me introduce introduce our panelists, and all of them need no introduction, but we'll just give them a quick one so we can get settled in. Jess Brooks is the Chief Development Officer at Sunwealth, a renewable energy investment firm working to build a more inclusive, clean energy economy. And we work with Sunwealth as well, which is great, and it's great to be partnering. But the big thing about Sunwealth is that or prior to joining Sunwealth, Jess was a senior vice president at Boston Community Capital, where she helped grow assets under management from 60 million to over $1 billion. So when we talk about women being effective in business, we know that to be true. JC Burton, hello. JC Burton is a lead AP BD plus C, and is the founder of and CEO of Maven Construction. Yes, we are building Boston physically. And Surge Construction Incubator. Maven Construction, under her vision, has led the redevelopment of high-performing capital assets, completed energy retrofit projects, and built new academic spaces. Her over 25-year career in commercial real estate has made her well sought after building life cycle thought leader. And that is true. That is true. Welcome, JC. It's great to have you here. And Michele Courton-Brown. Michele Courton-Brown is a seasoned executive with more than 2 decades of experience leading, managing, and providing strategic direction to philanthropic, corporate, and nonprofit organizations. Currently, she is Vice President of Business Development at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. Welcome, Michele. It's great to have you. I also feel like I have been a fan of you three at different points, like in Boston and throughout. And so it's just so great to have you all here. And we wanted to have this conversation, as Betty said today, because we're at a moment. We know that, right? We know that DE&I is hot, and we know that that's momentary. We know that in moments like this, we have to work to establish as much as possible. I was speaking earlier today and I almost said it's like some type of Squid Game, right? It's like we have a chance to run and then she turns around and we have to stop, right? And so, we want to talk about why it's so important for women in business and in philanthropy and leadership to to use their platforms, especially at times like this, to advance our work collectively and individually. So we want to talk to you all in the audience about these key industries: construction, healthcare, clean energy. I mean, if they're not in the paper every week around something that's happening in society, we know they're vital to our economic growth, and we know that women are needed, and greater representation is needed from women in this sector. And so let's get started with the conversation. As you all know, when we were back Zoom, I talked about how I looked at us and I just see our ancestors' wildestry. And I want to take a moment to just celebrate our history, our ancestors, and our collective strides as women, and especially now when we have, other more fluid sisters joining us, like this idea of what it means to be a woman. We want to celebrate that. And so I'd love to know, and Michele, let's start with you. What does being a woman at this moment mean to you?
Well, we have the mic, and I think we have this opportunity to use the mic. And while there are always going to be challenges, I don't know how many of us watch the confirmation hearing and had a range of emotions about what that was like, but we're ready for the moment. I think we're resilient. I believe we're smart. I believe that we are resilient, And I believe that we are stepping into our own space. And I don't think that a lot can take us down in this moment. So I'm in a space of just holding on to the notion of using my power for good and remembering that there's a lot of magic to being a woman. We're empathetic. We raise the next generation of human beings, and we actually know how to collaborate. We're natural collaborators. So using all those strengths in this moment, I think, is really important.
I love that. I love that. Jess, how about you? What does it mean to be a woman in this moment?
Yeah, so for me, I think I'm going to echo some of what Michele said. For me, this is a moment of opportunity, and also a moment of obligation. Opportunity because we've all just gone through something really big together. It may not be the way we wanted to spend our last couple of years, but boy, we just did it. And I think we are coming out of the pandemic and all the things that have gone on in the last 2 years with a greater sense of our connectedness to each other, and a recognition of our interdependence. I think we've seen a breakdown, literally, of the compartments that we put things in, of home and work, but also the compartments that we put people into. We're in this mess together, and we're going to get out of it together. I think we've seen also that that in times of deep crisis, we need to do things differently, and we've been able to do that, right? From changing how we work, to how we educate our kids, to how we develop and approve healthcare treatments, to how we go to the grocery store. We had to do things differently, and we did. And so that's the opportunity, right? Like, if there's a crisis, if there's something we need to do something about, we can do it. And then the moment of obligation, I think it's our interdependence. And also, I think an increasing awareness of the vast inequities, that we had different experiences of the pandemic based on our income level, our race, the zip code where we live. And the realization that those different experiences don't just apply to the pandemic, they apply to how we're able to access healthcare, how we're able to work safely, our experience with the police, our experience of climate-related disruptions, our ability to earn a living. And as a woman in this moment, as a mom in this moment, who cares about the world that my kids are growing up into, I feel this real obligation to address those inequities. I think increasingly, like, we're waking up, we realize we need to fix things, and we need to work both individually, but also collectively outside of the compartments in order to do it. I think we have seen that there's not salvation that's going to come from on high. There's not someone who's going to wave a magic wand and fix everything for us. It's like, we got to do it standing shoulder to shoulder with each other, and figuring out solutions. And I guess, the other thing I would say is just working in clean energy. I recognize that in this moment, over the next generation, right, we have this opportunity and obligation to transform the way we power the world. We're going to spend trillions of dollars doing it. And this is one of the biggest economic shifts and biggest opportunities of my lifetime. And if we make the right kind of investments right now in clean energy, in all the other solutions, right, we have the opportunity to transform our economic landscape, creating a whole bunch of economic opportunity, jobs, savings, wealth, a real stake in the future that we are building for a whole lot of people and communities that really need it. And we can do all that in the space of the next generation. And I guess I would just say, like, we've got to be really intentional about that and not lose that opportunity, because if we don't, we're going to end up with the flip of that, right? We're going to end up with a system where inequality is even worse.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you. Seizing the moment. JC, how about you?
Yeah, this is such an important time, right? I think that even to be on this panel today with the thought leadership of Boston Impact Initiative that was first kicked off by Michael and Deborah Fries, right? Them having the foresight and ability to think about how they too can use their impact to change the landscape of what's happening here in Boston and Massachusetts. And I am so thankful to be part of that group, that with a shared collective experience that we have among all of Boston Impact Initiative portfolio companies, many of which are led by women. And because of that, we have the platforms we have today. And even more so, I'm so proud to be part of an emerging group of thought leaders. You know, if you zoom back, just 5 years, women have not had the opportunities to have the platforms they currently have, where they can show that we're capable of moving the needle in all of our respective industries. And I just think about just construction, and just a small blip of time that I've been here, I've watched some of the statistics grow, and there are more women-owned businesses that are getting larger contracts. There are more women starting their own construction companies. There's some of which that I'm mentoring, and some of which that I am, behind the scenes, rooting for them and pushing them into positions so that they too can succeed. So I think for me, it's two things. It is the context of being part of an emerging group of thought leaders that are well respected and have a lot to say, and then also this notion idea of making sure that I'm also paying it forward a little bit and blowing the wind into others that should be working alongside me, and certainly those that are coming in right behind me.
I love that. I love that. And I think, the audience is feeling this energy of womanhood, right? Of female agency, right? This is what female agency looks like, and it's effective. We see that in the statistics, right? That women-led teams are more profitable. They're more likely to enter new markets successfully, and they have something called an innovation intensity. And women-led teams are actually have produced 20% more patents than men-led teams. So that's, that's receipts for ideas, right?
That's right.
And we see that so much. We're celebrating this moment. We're also recognizing its work and its flaw and it's, all of that. But, Michele, when we were preparing for this talk, you mentioned that women hold a more powerful position now. You mentioned it in the beginning of this talk as well. And I want to go into that a little bit, because we do have more power, right? Like, we were able to do things before when we didn't have the vote and we figured it out, right? And now we have this moment. And can you talk about how you leverage your leadership and power for the work you do both at Blue Cross and Blue Shield and in your philanthropy work?
Sure. So I guess what I would say is that I've had an opportunity to be a woman first, and a person of color first a number of times, as I know everyone on this call has had that opportunity. I started working in philanthropy in my mid-20s. I was running a corporate foundation before I turned 30. I moved to Boston, ran another corporate foundation. I led a startup company, and now I'm heading up business development and a $200 million venture fund at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And what I would say is different about this iteration in this moment is that while I have always strived to make an impact and to make sure that there's equity, I'm a little less patient this time around. And I am a little bit more demanding this time around, and not in a combative way, but I have questions. I have tons of questions. And if I'm on the board, I'm really looking for equity. I'm asking the questions about parity. I'm asking the questions about salary, equities. Is that happening? And I'd like to see evidence of that. I'm asking questions about the experience of our customers or our members. And is that equitable? I'm sitting in a venture space, and I'm asking startup companies and more established companies around things like AI. What are you doing around bias in AI? And I'm looking for good answers. And so I think when earlier in my career, I was still trying to make an impact, but I might have been a little bit more self-conscious. I'm not really troubled that way anymore.
The kids call that something, Michele, given less F's. JC, I see you nodding. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in.
No, I think this is the time to be bold, right? That we can't sit on our hands and play accommodation politics, which has been the way that typically the women in the
Wait, say it
past.
again. We can say it again. We can't. Accommodation politics.
Yeah, we typically are so diplomatic that women play accommodation politics, right? We are certainly trying to accommodate the thoughts and ideas of someone that may have an opposing thought, as well as moving our agenda along. And that's done very diplomatically. Women are masters of it. We've done it for decades. But now is a time that we are no longer walking in accommodation politics, and we are being more bold and being more demanding. And I think for the first time, the community, a lot of our male, and my industry is dominated by men. So I'll just, shoot right from the hip. In my industry, men are finally picking up the phone to call me for ideas, right? And then I have to say, well, are you paying me as a consultant, or do you want me on your team? How is this going to work? Because I can't just continue to release my IP for purpose of your gain, right? So how can we move forward with that? And sometimes they're a little taken aback by it, but they certainly figure out which way they want to go. And so I think that being able to understand that we're walking within our power and being bold enough to say that we no longer have to play accommodation politics is the way that we advance the ball, move it down the field more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Jess, I see you nodding. I just saw all the energy of all you ladies. So I'm like, we need to get you all to speak on this. And then JC, the next question is for you. So be ready, sis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would echo what both Michele and JC said. I mean, I talked about it before. I'm thinking about generational change in clean energy and in all the stuff that I'm doing. And the idea that it's like the stuff that we're doing right now is going to have repercussions for the next generation, and we're teeing up the next generation. For me and for us in the work that we do, it's thinking like not just in terms of how much we create, which is important, but it's about where we create it. It's about who actually benefits from it. It's who's getting the jobs, it's who's getting the power, it's who's getting the savings. And it's about, it's where we do it, right? We're thinking about getting solar into cities, onto the rooftops and parking lots of schools, fire stations, libraries, churches. It's about getting solar into rural communities like West Virginia that have long depended on coal and that have powered this nation, and giving them a place in powering the nation going forward. And it's about getting it to renters, to folks who don't own their homes, to folks who don't have perfect credit. I come at it from the world of community development finance, where we're working to bring capital to low-income communities that have been left behind, that have been ignored, that have been disincluded from the conversation. And I can tell you, it's a lot easier to build an inclusive economy when you include the communities in the process from the get-go, right?
I love that.
I think my leadership as a woman plays out at two levels. I think it plays out in conversations with investors and external partners. And then I think it also plays out in conversations with women in solar on my team and outside of it. And there's a role in both those places. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but I want to give folks space.
Yes. And right after JC, the next particular question is going to be aimed to you, Jess. So I also want to make sure that you're not, what is it called when you
I'm jumping ahead. I'm totally like,
when you scoop yourself. When you scoop yourself, that's the word I'm looking for. JC, so, I mean, obviously you're a clear leader in the industry, but you're doing more than building, right? You're like, I'm going to take on policy. I'm going to take on advocacy change. I'm going to, create incubator. And it's because change is holistic. Right. Yes. There's not, if there was just one thing, if we could have just freed the slaves, then Harriet Tubman would have done all that and we would have been on to better things by this generation. Sure. Right. And, so you have to take the whole, you have to look at this holistically, and you did. And so can you talk to us about what it means and how it really affects how you, to what Jess was saying, how you think about the future generations of women construction, construction owners and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, sure. So first, I come with 27 years of construction experience. A lot of that in energy retrofit projects, large projects, as well as 11 of those 27 years have been, actually 12 of those 27 years I've been working for myself, right? Have led my own teams doing the same work on institutions of higher education, corporate partners, as well as some healthcare and labs. In fact, my company is probably one of the few Black and female-led companies that have done significant work in biomedical field, in that we've built a lot of labs, and we've also worked on a lot of lab projects per se. And so when I moved to Boston, I thought, gosh, how can I figure out how we can have more women in general just involved in construction? The nation averages about 9% of women across the board in construction. And then in Boston, when I first moved, it was about 3.4, and now we're at 4%. So the needle is moving a little bit. But I had to think about what is really challenging women per se, and why we cannot lead. And a lot of that has to do with our financial positions, especially women of color, our own financial positions within our communities. We are often daughters and mothers and taking care of multiple generations at one time, both our mothers as well as our children. We are often the ones that are lending across to our sisters and to our brothers to help them as well. And so when we think about how we need to move forward, we don't think about that for just ourselves. We think about it in the community context. And so my solution to that was to create a construction incubator that's solely focused on growing and scaling existing construction companies that are led by women and people of color, so that they have the opportunity to participate in a $10 billion economy, which is what our construction economy is annually here, and just in Massachusetts. It's a huge economy. And then within silos of that are the renewable energy economy and offshore wind. That has another $6 or $7 billion earmarked for that. And then there's a historic preservation component, and then that has another $3 billion, all of which are devoid of women and people of color, and then of course, women of color specifically. So one of those solutions is Surge, the incubator. We're currently finishing up a couple of the components of that with Harvard Business School. Boston Consulting Group has been a thought leader with us, as well as making sure we can deliver it to marketplace. It'll be a wraparound support services for those companies, and we're solely focused on their growth.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And those numbers are real. I mean, 4% being like a win, right? I mean, this is the stuff that in Boston, where there's a crane every block, this is the stuff that we have to really think about. And again, I think it goes to show how women we did work in the Onondaga Indian Nation, and Chief Oran Lions, right, said that women are the keepers of the generation.
We are,
right?
But in doing so, we're thinking about the solutions for that. I mean, in addition to that, I'm also working on a state-sponsored bonding program where we're asking, right, and advocating that the state utilize a bonding program that will help, again, women-owned construction companies and those with people of color, because every project here in Massachusetts requires a bond. And if you don't have an asset, it's hard to get started with bonding. And so we're really working with them diligently. So far, they're listening, right? The state is listening, because there are other states that have also led this platform with the state bonding. So those two are my solutions to what is a larger problem. But then I hope to make sure that there are more women that can participate in construction. And so the next time we have this conversation, we're moving closer to the 9% and maybe hopefully beyond.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you. So Jess, again, intergenerational change. And, I mean, being someone who's holding clean energy, which, I mean, it's the only future, right, we have, unless we want zero energy, which is something that we definitely don't want. And we're seeing the generational changes, right? I mean, I say this a lot in my talks and in my workshops, right? The youngest insurrectionist was 35. the youngest environmental marcher with Greta Thunberg was 4, right? It just goes to speak to where the generations are looking for their answers, and climate change and clean energy is definitely one of those. So can you help us, can you talk to us around what happens if we do not address, the impact of a more inclusive economy and climate change, and how your leadership in, again, similar, I mean, show me the female dominated industry, right? Like, I feel like, what is that? But, just how you shape your leadership to reflect these reminders that we're in different times.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. Like we have this moment. We're going to be investing a ton of money in energy transition, and we talk about it in terms of energy transition or transition to clean energy. I think what we don't talk about is the economic shift that's going on with that, and the redistribution of power. I mean, it's the redistribution of electrical energy where it's getting created, but it's also power and who's controlling it, who's benefiting from it, who's got a stake in that future economy. And I think it's I think being a woman plays out in how we invest and how we think about investing. I see it in my conversations with investors all the time. And I think being a woman plays out in how we develop that solar economy. And I see that in talking to members of my team. When I walk into a room as a woman in this industry, in my organization, I think it tells people from the get-go, we're going to have a different conversation from the conversation that they had with the 100 other solar companies that walked through their door, right? We're not your typical solar company where everybody looks the same, where everybody went to the same colleges or the same business schools, where everybody runs the same financial models. They're sitting down because our team looks different. We've got different professional and lived experiences that we're bringing to the work. And that means we have a different lens that we're bringing to the work as well. When I sit down with a young woman who's on my team or with young women who are considering careers in the field, I think what they see is an opportunity to build a career in a place where their voice is going to be valued, where there is an opportunity to lead and to do something that really fires them up and that they believe in. At the same time, I think they're realistic about the world that we live in. I was talking to a young woman on my team prepping for this, like sort of crowdsourcing the what am I going to talk about? She's a project developer, has been on the team for about a year, working with solar developers and installers all the time. She has had hundreds of conversations with dozens of different partners. And she told me there's been another woman on the other end of the phone 4 times. And she said, and that makes no sense, right? Like you're shaking your head, that makes no sense. I think about other women installers and developers that I've worked with and heard from. The woman who's a New York City Housing Authority resident who is working as a solar apprentice, the single mom in West Virginia who is so excited to have a job where she's got health insurance. And they both talk about the ability to earn the money that's going to put food on the table, that's going to take care of their kids, and that's a job that's going to be here for the future. It's not going away. And that's building the world that they want to live in. We have to make more of those jobs available. And we have to make that career path available to so that the woman in my office who's only talked to 4 other women can see the pathways for her.
That's right.
And so, when I'm talking to women investors, when I'm talking to women developers, I do think we have this opportunity to see other sides of the equation, to place different values on the returns that we're creating, that don't all show up on the balance sheet the same way. And I think when you're trying to change outcomes, that different lens is invaluable.
I'd like to pick up on that, Jesse,
Yes.
because I think that Boston Impact Initiative is a true leader, and I'm glad to see the Freeze family here on the call. As a portfolio company, Quality Interactions is a company that I ran for 7 years, and am proud that I could leave the day-to-day and still have the legacy of the organization exist and grow and continue to flourish under the leadership of another woman, Ashley, who has been just picked up the baton and done what we do, right? But one of the things I think that BII is a real maverick at is aligning values with operations. So the idea that portfolio companies are rewarded for their investment and their commitment to salary equity, to gender equity, to representation. That's not something that a lot of investors think about doing, but it's really important. And asking the hard questions about, are we sharing wealth, right? There's a Boston Federal Reserve Bank did a study that I'm sure all of us saw about what the median net wealth was, or the net worth was of people of color. You know, it was abysmal, right? And I think if we sliced it between genders, it would also be abysmal, you know? Those kinds of policies and practices that align with a growth strategy are aimed at improving the economic quality of life for all. And the thing that I think is really important about the folks who are in this square is whether it's banking, climate, construction, health, these are all interrelated disciplines. You can't have one without the other, right? About the impact of COVID on our communities. What we saw was that people who had higher incomes had the luxury of being at home. Folks who didn't have the opportunity to be employed unless they left their homes were literally putting their lives at risk. And one of the things I hope we learn from this experience is that we are inextricably linked to each other. So the health and welfare of the caregiver who's making $15 an hour is really connected to whether grandma and grandpa are going to live, right? That's what we learned through COVID. And so I'm hoping that interconnectivity, that opportunity to collaborate, that thing that we as women do naturally, and this new empowered space where we are going to speak our truth to power. We're going to use data and facts and relationships to advance the agenda, as JC has so admirably done, that I know that Jesse's done in the past, that I do in the work that I'm doing, that we just do more of that. I don't change our agenda. We just have to be more intentional. We have to be more focused in how we collaborate, and we have to really hold others to account around their own performance.
I appreciate that so much, Michele. Thank you. Thank you. You know, and that leads into the next question. And, you know, and ladies, you decide who goes first, but, you know, what are some ways that we can collaborate, right? We know our sectors are interconnected, Michele, as you said. And, you know, are there ways that you've thought of or that you see that we can collaborate, and that BII, right, can help us, to your point, Michele, collaborate with intention, you know, in your industries to get collective impact?
I have some thoughts about how we collaborate, really. I think that I kind of attune it to, you know, when you walk into a building, we walk into a home and it's a bachelor pad. You can tell that it's a bachelor pad. You know that it's been male designed and furnished. And I link our construction industry to just as a point in time as where we are. We're in the bachelor pad stage, right? And then once you invite the women in, it becomes much more warm, right? Much more engaging. It's a place you want to be around longer. And our buildings are like that too, whether they are a healthcare building, whether it's an education, it's an institution of education, higher or K through 12. Our approach to how we are redesigning huge renewable energy systems and or solar and PV is changing. It's starting to look better, right? We've got some better ideas around how that should aesthetically look and feel when you see some of those technologies. And I think it's because women are involved. And so the collaboration comes when you have an opportunity to ask, whether you're in a decision-making role, you know, where's the female voice, right? I want you to move beyond the bachelor pad. And where's the female voice in this context, because it's so evident that when we are involved, things are just better.
Mm, mm.
I love that. I love that. There's something very true to the feminization of power, right? And it's important. Again, talking about the Onondaga Indian Nation, Chief Warren Lyons said that the only people who could declare war were the clan mothers.
Mm.
And so you would have warriors who would want to fight wars because they were, he stepped on my shoe, right? Whatever it was, like, we're going to get him. And then they would bring it to the elders and be like, yo, he stepped on my shoe. We about to go there and get him. And then the elders would be like, well, he kind of stepped on his shoe 3 times. Like, maybe this is where, but then they would have to take that to the clan mothers. And it was decided that it was the clan mothers who could say, yes, we can now go. We're allowed to lose the babies that we built, right? Like for this cause. And it's again understanding that no one was going to think about war in the way that mothers think about war, right? And no one else will have that same feelings. And it's important that we use all of our powers for good. So I so appreciate that. And as someone who has a couple of cousins who still have bachelor pads, yes, their bathrooms alone are enough to let you know what exclusion brings. Just go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the bachelor pad front, I mean, I think it's totally right. Like we also have to look at our industries and say, people like to complain about the fact that there's not enough talent. It's because it's like having a bachelor pad and saying, I don't understand why there aren't women and mothers in this space. It's because it's filthy. Come on, clean it out.
It's
make it a space where people want to be.
There's a urinal, and we may have to pee,
clean the freaking bathroom, and then ask where the women are. Yeah, no, that's right.
Exactly. I love that, Jess. I love that. I also want to let the audience know that we're going to be opening it up for questions soon. So start getting your questions in the chat so that we can get to them. I want to jump back to this idea of our individual agency and talk about the opportunities that we're seeing in the industry. And so for women who may want, who might be looking at you, JC, and being like, I knew I could build things, right? I'm going to leave, I was going to say, I'm going to leave Suffolk. I'm not telling anyone to leave Suffolk, but I'm going to leave where I am and I'm going to go out on my own, right?
Yes.
What are the opportunities that you're seeing in each of your industries? And Jess, we can start with you, to briefly talk about the opportunities you're seeing in your industries for women and that other women should, that we might want to know about, tell your friends about, put on the Instagram.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the biggest opportunity is just the growth, right? Like in this country right now, there are close to 250,000 solar jobs. That's a rapid increase from what it was. But I'll tell you, if we do nothing, if none of the Biden agenda is moving forward, in 8 years, by 2030, we're going to have twice as many folks working in solar. So that's a lot of job opportunities. Here in Massachusetts, we've got 10,000 people working in solar. It's going to be twice that, more than twice that, right? So it's growing. And if the Biden agenda, if any of it passes, if we are going to hit the decarbonization goals that we need to by 2035, we've got to triple or quadruple that workforce. So there's a ton of opportunity. And I would say from a business perspective, there is business opportunity in the spots where everybody else isn't. I think about the work that we're doing, the focus in community-based solar. It's a really open market, and somebody's gonna create a whole lot of impact in that space. And I do think women can see it differently. I do think people who come from a different than the standard background, who are willing to look at I guess just beyond the traditional model, are going to be the ones that uncover and discover that real opportunity. The people that can build bridges, and so bridge builders welcome, and people who want to build that future welcome. I think that we need to think a little bit differently about how we measure ourselves, how we measure our outcomes, and what outcomes we're measuring for. And that's a piece that I think women can play a role in it. I think investors like BII can play a role in it, asking different questions. And I think that's, that's one of the things we got to be focused on as well.
Love it. Love it. Michele, how about you? What are the opportunities you're seeing?
Well, there's a couple of things happening simultaneously. I think consumerism is coming to healthcare. Folks are looking to have a different experience than they're having with their primary care provider. Young people have had the DoorDash experience, and now they want the DoorDash health experience, right? And at the same time, we've seen burnout in healthcare professionals. COVID has really burned out a lot of doctors and nurses. I think there are going to be some transformative models and new ways to access roles in healthcare, mostly led by nurses. And so those who are interested in for people, now don't have to think about a medical degree pathway is the only way to be impactful around key decisions in the future. I think that nurses are going to be playing an even more critical role. So I see that as an opportunity. I also see the biomedical arena here in Massachusetts, here in Boston in particular, huge opportunity, not just for science-oriented folks, but there's HR, there's public relations, there's just a plethora of opportunity that the industry is creating, and there's an opportunity to tap into that. And in terms of collaboration, which I think was the second question you asked, I'm going to do this real time. So I am vice chair of Youth Build USA, which is actually an international organization that is about youth development and helping kids get to the middle class through a career in construction and beyond. So I just heard what Jess said. I'm going to be talking to Jess about how we can bring solar jobs and apprenticeships into the Youth Build ecosystem. We've not met before, but we're going to be connecting about opportunities there as well. And I think the more that we just seize the moment where we to connect the dots real time, that's how we get it done. And that's what I know everyone on this call does normally. But I think this notion of doing it with intention and with a real desire to make change with people who also want to make change, that's how this happens.
Amen.
Yeah, that's great. I think when I think about this, construction is one of the oldest industries in the world, right? We go back and look at we go back to Egypt and think about the temples and the pyramids and things that were built in Giza and Alexandria. It's quite remarkable. And often those buildings were built as a gift to a woman, although we don't really recognize that. So in those ways, they're often gifts to women to show how great and how much that she was appreciated. So I think it's an interesting component of our industry that we're not necessarily recognizing. But construction needs more women because we need the diversity of thought, right? The diversity of thought is what continues to solve problems. I think I mentioned a little bit about the opportunities as far as numbers are concerned. 10 billion in construction annually in this state. Not if you just go outside the region into Connecticut and Rhode Island and New York, the numbers continue to increase. The renewable energy, in order to help the state to achieve its 2050 roadmap to decarbonization, is super important, and those have a certain set of jobs that are really all around construction and or repurposing and adapting buildings and spaces and places. And then you think about the historic preservation of keeping our most sacred buildings intact. Those are just three sectors within construction that are super important. And I left just a little bit of my own testimony. I left the company that I worked for that was Suffolk-like 12 or 13 years ago now, because I was extremely successful in those projects. My project won awards. My team members got promotions. I was often sought after internal to the company to try to fix a problem on someone else's project while managing my own, right? I'd written a business plan about the company carving off a whole new market sector and they found that they weren't interested at the time. And so then I took that business plan and I left because I knew that I would have success. I'd proven that I'd have success with a large company. And I know that if I just built one project a year, that I would be okay. That one project turned into 10 and turned into, several more. And here we are. 12 years later, excited to still be building, but still hungry to do more. And so we do need more women that if they're not ready to leave, I certainly want to hire them. I certainly want to give them a pathway of showing what they can do, and give them the space and place to experiment and try some new things that you may not necessarily get with a traditionally led construction company. And then I also want them to be able to at some point land in the incubator so that they do have the wraparound support and they can grow their own company when they're ready.
Can we just double click on that notion of when it's time to move on for greater opportunity and greater impact? That's what I just heard JC say. This is what I want to emphasize, the importance of being willing to take that kind of risk for the reward and opportunity that comes with that.
Amen. Amen. And to also recognize, wait, I have the success, right? I mean, another thing I heard you say, JC, that just hit, like I felt it. It was like I had been successful. Like, so am I going to just keep being successful for you? Right? Or am I going to put some of this genius into my pocket and into my kids' 528 or whatever,
That's
right?
No,
like,
I mean, that's exactly right. The success I was having would not necessarily translate to my own economic increase, right? It certainly benefited the company. And there are several awards that, again, that the company still has based upon, and even technologies within the construction industry. I really took risk, and I would take measured risk. But I had definitely have gotten all types of awards and trying to approach things a little different way. So I think that when you've gotten to the point when you've mastered your field, and you are looking to do something that is solely for yourself, not to be afraid, there's a community here that will support you.
Amen. Amen. I also want to call folks to the chat and see if anyone has any questions from the audience. And so while we're waiting to see if anyone's going to throw anything in the chat or, raise a hand, I also want to shout out to Julie, who's writing some great stuff in the chat. Just around how awesome we are, and how we network, lift up all boats. Thank you so much for your comments. Shout out to Nadine holding down our small business community. Says know when it's time to move on and know when it's time to let go. Those are good lessons for career and life, really.
I liked the comment also about women as weavers. You've heard each of us say something about the interconnectedness of the problems that we're trying to solve. And I think we get knocked all the time for not being good at compartmentalizing, or like, oh, I should be better at like putting the work here and putting the home here or the personal here, whatever it is. I actually think this is a place where not compartmentalizing is a superpower, is a strength. It's that ability to see the bigger picture and that ability to measure all the bottom lines, not just one. I think we have the problems that we have because we start to think about things in boxes, like what's my silo, what's my solution, and I think that might be
just press it here and not understand where it's going to come out on the other.
Right, and that might be the way to maximize revenues, but it's not the way to solve the big problems. So getting outside the boxes and thinking about like big picture, what are the outcomes that we want? And then, what are the threads, right? And then how do you weave them together? I mean, I think that's really important.
I also think that we're not afraid of our own success, right? If I want to clone 5 more of me this year, right? How can I find 5 more women that are ready to scale up their businesses? And I want them to be in place this time next year. How can I find 10 more by the time I'm ready to retire? And we're not afraid of replacing ourselves in a way that is impactful and has a long legacy. I'm certainly willing to do that, now, which is why I started the incubator, which is why I'm working on the bonding program, because I know that those are the tools that are needed to help more companies grow, more women grow.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any questions from the audience? Again, Julie with a great comment around how we lead with love over fear. There's so many stories we can tell there, right? Just that sentence alone just made me think about my mother, who was a single mother, right? I mean, it's you see this actions in big ways, in small ways, of how women get things done. Fun fact, Mother's Day is one of the most celebrated days, and more flowers are bought on Mother's Day than anything, than any other holiday. And I think it just goes to show the power of the power that women have in our society. Whether it's, I'm a proud auntie, I'm a dedicated auntie. And I also throw myself in part of that, right? Helping moms raise children is part of my job as an auntie. So, Deborah says, question for panel: what kind of support do you need or want from men? Noticing how few men are here. What does male allyship look like? With the last couple of minutes that we have, who wants to take that on for us?
I've had some really powerful and strong male mentors. For many years, I worked at the predecessor banks of Bank of America, and I worked for a guy named Ira Jackson, who would make space for me. So when I first moved to Boston, I moved from Hartford, Connecticut, was not well connected. And he would just call me up at the end of the day and say, you know, like, before you go home, do you want to go have a drink? And usually be about an opportunity to meet the mayor and to not have an authentic conversation with them. You know, in my current role, I work for executive vice president, Pat Gilligan, and his ability to make space, right? To allow me to lead, but to also make space, super helpful, super helpful. And I think that part of the equation has to do, a successful equation, the success of having those relationships has to do with being a bit vulnerable and also being clear about what you need in those relationships to advance. And sometimes I feel that we might be polite, sort of back to accommodation politics. What would you like me to do versus what I want to do, or what I need to do, or what I have to do to advance agendas. We have a role in that mentorship relationship.
I love that. Again, back to our agency, JC, and then Jess, and then we'll close this out and I'll kick it back to Betty.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's a misnotion that inviting women into the space means that there's less pie for the men to eat. Right. We are multipliers just by who we are. We multiply in everything that we do. And so the pie only gets bigger when women are involved and when we're around. And so what that means is that we need your patient capital. We need your capital invested into our companies to be patient. We need your understanding. We need the courtesy of a conversation when there's something that may not be going right. And sometimes from a male perspective to a woman, they're not necessarily want to have those conversations, but we need the courtesy of saying, hey, we wanted you to really kind of focus on this and you focused on that. And so let's talk about that a little bit. We want those course corrective conversations that you would have as if we were male. We want you to understand that we are just as dedicated and committed to getting the job done and exceeding the financial performance that we set aside for ourselves. We are more importantly, we want to make sure that we are hitting the impact. And so being understanding about that impact is so important. And specifically in construction, if there's anybody that is in the industry that's male, we want you to take aside a woman and teach her something on every day that you didn't think that she would know. Because the only way that I got to where I am now is I had a general superintendent that was 20 years my senior. We still talk on his birthday every year. He is long retired, but every day he took me on a walk our project sites together for a period of more than 2 years, and tested me and pushed me, but also gave me the confidence that I knew more than the guys, and that I can do just as good a work, if not better than, because I thought differently. I did have the diversity of thought.
Of that.
I have nothing to add when these women have been so brilliant. I mean, I think the only thing I would say is to men, I think it's I was talking to someone the other day who was like, you know, is the job for me to figure out how to step aside? Is the job for me to to step aside, step down so that other people can lead. And I was saying, it's just make space at the table right now. I mean, I think it's build a bigger table. And I think it's recognize that it's not just sins of commission, it's also sins of omission. And so that if you're not doing something to proactively build that bigger table and to welcome folks in, then you are keeping folks out. And so figure out how to change that. I think about it in terms of like the solar trades and the fact that, if you have a whole bunch of folks who look one way, you end up getting a whole bunch more folks who look that way, unless you're intentionally saying we're going to look different.
Listen, it's what I learned from my own genetics, right? You don't get a Black baby from 2 white parents. And it's the same thing in a business. If you have 2 white founders, you're going to struggle with diversity. I guarantee you, in a way that others don't. I also want to throw out a process that we use with our folks and our clients. It's called the 3 L's: listen, learn, and take loving action. And I think it's the best thing men can do. This idea of centering your actions in loving space, right? In brotherly love, and the phila of Greek love is where we need the actions to be reparative, and it needs to be, so listen, learn, love. That's what I give to all my male allies. Everyone, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience. I want to give my amazing panelists a round of applause. Betty, girl, I love partnering with you on events, and we're already thinking of a couple more to do, so more to come. But thank you so much, Betty, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Malia and Jess, JC, Michele, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. It's always fantastic to collaborate with you, but this, like I said, you have helped us kick off our New Majority Future speaker series, and we're very grateful to have your thought leadership, your insights that you have been able to share with our amazing group of both board members, our co-founders, Michael and Deborah Fries, our investors that are here, and we have a number of entrepreneurs on the call as well. So thank you for sharing all of your insights. And I will just leave you with this. You've talked about this interconnectedness that we have, right? So I look at how can we continue building an interconnected ecosystem that's built on relationships. In the end, what we are also helping to foster is the deep relationships of trust amongst us. And I invite all of you here on the call, not just us, who we're going to build something awesome together too, but for everybody to connect with each other, connect with some of these awesome entrepreneurs here as well, to keep building this interconnected ecosystem that relies on joint strategy, collective action, and solidarity. We need to work in coalition and collaboration. So thank you. Have an amazing, amazing day, and close out Women's History Month with a bang. Thanks so much.